In 1998, a book was published that made powerful people furious. Not because it was wrong, because it was right. Libraries banned it. Schools refused to teach it. Corporations quietly removed it from their recommended reading lists. And yet, it became one of the most read books in history, passed hand to hand in prisons, boardrooms, and backrooms, read in secret by the same people who publicly condemned it. That book is The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. There are 48 laws in total, but today we are not going to talk about all 48. We are going to talk about the 10 that make people the most uncomfortable. The ones that expose things most people would prefer to believe are not true. The ones that, once you understand them, you cannot unsee. By the end of this video, you will understand why certain people always seem to win in business, in relationships, in life, while others, no matter how hard they work or how good their intentions, keep losing. Let's begin. Robert Greene spent years studying history's most powerful figures: kings, generals, seducers, con artists, philosophers, and revolutionaries. He read thousands of historical accounts, looking for patterns, for the hidden logic beneath the surface of human power. What he found was uncomfortable. It contradicted almost everything we are taught about how success works, about the value of honesty, loyalty, modesty, and hard work. He did not invent these laws. He observed them. He extracted them from the behavior of people who had actually achieved and held power across 3,000 years of recorded human history. The 48 Laws of Power is not a book about how the world should work. It is a book about how the world does work. And the gap between those two things, that gap is where most people get destroyed. Here are the 10 laws they were too afraid to teach you. Law 1. Never outshine the master. This is Law 1 in the book, and it is the one that gets people fired, passed over for promotions, and quietly pushed out of organizations, without ever understanding why. The law states this: always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please and impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite: inspire fear and insecurity. Here's the psychology behind it. Every person in a position of authority has an ego investment in their position. They believe, consciously or not, that their superiority is natural, deserved, and important. When someone beneath them performs too brilliantly, solves problems too elegantly, or displays qualities that make the leader look ordinary by comparison, something dangerous happens in the leader's mind. They feel threatened, even if they never say it, even if they consciously believe they want talented people around them. The emotional reality, the animal reality, is that brilliance in a subordinate feels like a challenge to dominance. History is full of examples. Nicolas Fouquet was the finance minister of France under Louis XIV, arguably the most talented administrator in the country. He threw a party for the king so magnificent, so overwhelming in its beauty and extravagance, that Louis XIV returned home in a fury and had Fouquet arrested 3 weeks later on fabricated charges. He died in prison. Fouquet's crime was not corruption. His crime was making the Sun King feel small. In modern workplaces, this plays out constantly, quietly, and with devastating consistency. The brilliant analyst who solves every problem in the room and slowly finds herself excluded from important meetings. The new manager who restructures his department so effectively that his boss begins to feel unnecessary and finds his next performance review mysteriously negative. The employee who gives the presentation of her life and is never asked to present again. The solution Greene offers is not to hide your intelligence. It is to redirect it. Make your talents serve those above you in ways that make them look good. Frame your successes as extensions of their vision. Let them take credit where credit matters. The goal is not to be seen as the smartest person in the room. It is to make the most powerful person in the room feel like the smartest person in the room. This is not dishonesty. It is the recognition of a fundamental human truth. Ego is not rational, and power protects itself instinctively. Law 2, always say less than necessary. Powerful people, Greene observed, speak less. Weak people speak more. This seems counterintuitive. We live in a world that rewards articulation, that values people who can explain themselves, that equates communication with competence. And yet, across history, in every culture, in every field, the people who hold genuine authority tend to speak with striking economy. Why? Because words are information, and information is power that you are giving away. Every time you speak, you are revealing something. Your priorities, your fears, your opinions, your level of certainty or uncertainty, the gaps in your knowledge, the things you want. When you speak more than necessary, you give others the raw material to understand you. And understanding you is the first step to manipulating you. Silence, on the other hand, creates a specific kind of power. It is unsettling. When you say less than people expect, they fill the silence with their own thoughts, their own projections, their own anxieties. You become harder to read, harder to counter, harder to dismiss. Greene tells the story of Louis XIV, who appears several times in the 48 Laws, using silence as a weapon. When people approached him with requests or complaints, he would often simply stare at them without responding. The silence was so uncomfortable that people would fill it, often saying things they had not intended to say, revealing more than they had planned. The king learned more from the silences than from any answer he could have given. In negotiation, silence after an offer is one of the most powerful moves available. Most people cannot bear the discomfort of silence. They fill it with concessions, justifications, or backtracking. In leadership, the person who speaks carefully and rarely creates an aura of weight and deliberation. When they do speak, people listen. Compare this to the person who fills every meeting with words, whose voice becomes background noise, whose opinions are dismissed before they are finished being stated. The practical application: in any high-stakes situation, say approximately half of what you plan to say. Make your point once, clearly, then stop. Do not justify, elaborate, or soften. The discomfort of the silence that follows belongs to the other person. Law 3. Conceal your intentions. We covered a version of this in our Machiavelli video, but Greene's formulation goes deeper, and the examples he uses are particularly revealing. The law: keep people off balance and in the dark by never revealing the purpose behind your actions. If they have no clue what you are after, they cannot prepare a defense. Greene distinguishes between two tactics: using false sincerity and using smokescreens. False sincerity is exactly what it sounds like. Expressing openness and honesty so convincingly that people stop looking for what you are actually doing. The person who seems to have no agenda is often the person with the most sophisticated one. Smokescreens are more elaborate. creating visible activity or apparent goals that draw attention away from your real objectives. While people are focused on what you appear to be doing, you are doing something else entirely. The historical example Greene returns to repeatedly is the great seducer, not in the romantic sense, but in the broader sense of someone who moves people toward outcomes they did not consciously choose. The most effective operators in history were never the ones who announced their intentions. They were the ones who created environments, circumstances, and emotional states that made their desired outcome seem like the other person's own idea. In business, this is the art of framing. A company that announces, "We are acquiring your firm," triggers resistance. A company that spends 6 months building relationships, sharing resources, creating dependency, and making its acquisition target feel like a partner, and then announces what was always inevitable, encounters a very different reaction. The lesson is not that you should deceive people in your personal relationships. It is that in any competitive environment, transparency about your goals is almost always a strategic disadvantage. The person who reveals exactly what they want gives others a roadmap for either blocking them or extracting maximum concessions before cooperating. Law 4. Always make those you deal with feel they are smarter than you are. This law is the psychological inverse of Law 1, and together they form a complete picture of how power actually navigates social hierarchies. Law 1 tells you, never make those above you feel inferior. Law 4 tells you always make those you are dealing with, particularly those whose cooperation you need, feel superior. The mechanism Greene describes is deceptively simple. When people feel clever, they become generous. When they feel they have outsmarted you or seen through you or gained advantage over you, their guard drops. Their suspicion decreases. Their willingness to cooperate increases. Greene calls this playing the perfect foil, appearing slightly less perceptive than you are, slightly slower to understand, slightly more naive, not stupid. That creates contempt. Just a little less sharp than the person you are dealing with. The historical master of this technique was Talleyrand, the French diplomat who survived and thrived through the French Revolution, Napoleon, and the Restoration, serving radically different governments in succession, always finding himself on the winning side. His secret, according to Greene, was that he made every leader he served feel that he was the mastermind, and Talleyrand merely the excellent executor. In reality, Talleyrand was often the one actually setting direction. But he understood that the person who appears to hold power and the person who actually holds it are frequently not the same. In everyday terms, the person in a negotiation who seems slightly confused, slightly uncertain, slightly less knowledgeable about the details, while actually knowing every detail perfectly, has a systematic advantage over the person who signals their expertise. The expert signals what they value. The person who appears uncertain learns what the other side values, while giving nothing away. This requires genuine discipline. Most intelligent people find it deeply uncomfortable to appear less intelligent than they are. The ego resists. But the strategist who can override this impulse, who can wear the mask of the slightly bewildered while processing everything with perfect clarity, has access to a dimension of power that the openly brilliant person never will. Law 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Reputation, Greene argues, is the cornerstone of power. With a solid reputation, you can achieve almost anything. Without it, you are naked, vulnerable to every attack, every accusation, every rumor. The law has two parts. First, build your reputation on one quality, one central characteristic that becomes inseparably associated with your name. This quality must be genuine, but it must also be deliberately cultivated and consistently projected. The moment people can complete the sentence, "He is the person who," or "she is known for," you have a reputation. And reputation, once established, does much of your work for you. Second, actively destroy the reputations of your enemies before they can destroy yours. Greene is blunt about this in a way that makes people uncomfortable. Reputation is a competitive resource. If you are perceived as the most honest person in your field, that perception comes partly at the expense of others being perceived as less honest. Reputation is relative as much as it is absolute. The historical example that stays with readers is the story of how P.T. Barnum built his career, not just on his own spectacles, but on the systematic discrediting of rival shows. Every time a competitor attracted attention, Barnum found ways to cast doubt on their authenticity, their quality, their morality. He understood that in a crowded marketplace, the question was not just, "Why choose me?" but "Why not choose them?" In the modernist context, this is the logic of competitive positioning in every industry. Companies do not just advertise their own virtues. They subtly and systematically undermine confidence in alternatives. Politicians do not just build their own images. They work to damage their opponents. The individual application. Your reputation is always in motion. It is not something you establish once and maintain effortlessly. It requires active management. Every interaction either builds or erodes it. Every person who speaks about you either reinforces or complicates the narrative you are trying to project. And critically, the moment you detect someone working to damage your reputation, do not wait. Do not hope it resolves itself. Respond. Clearly, decisively, and in a way that turns the attack back on the attacker. Law seeks, court attention at all costs. Everything is judged by its appearance. What is unseen counts for nothing. This law makes people deeply uncomfortable because it seems to reward superficiality over substance. And in a sense, it does. Not because substance is irrelevant, but because substance without visibility is invisible, and invisible things have no power. Greene's point is not that you should be hollow. It is that you must be seen. The person with half your talent who commands twice your visibility will, in practical terms, outperform you consistently. Because power flows toward those who are noticed, not necessarily toward those who are most capable. The historical figure Greene uses as the master of this law is P.T. Barnum again, but also figures like Cleopatra, who staged her arrivals and meetings as theatrical productions designed to create specific emotional impressions. She did not simply appear before powerful men. She appeared in ways that were impossible to forget, impossible to dismiss, impossible to categorize as ordinary. In the modern world, this is the logic of personal branding, which most people misunderstand as self-promotion or vanity. It is neither. It is the recognition that in a world saturated with information and people, the scarce resource is not capability, it is attention. The person who commands attention has access to resources, relationships, and opportunities that equally capable but invisible people simply do not. The practical implication is uncomfortable for many people. Being good at your work is necessary but not sufficient. You must also be good at being seen doing your work. You must cultivate what Greene calls a large shadow, a presence that extends beyond your immediate circle, that makes your name familiar in rooms you have never entered. This does not require dishonesty. It requires deliberate cultivation of visibility through consistent output, through strategic relationships, through finding the moments and platforms where your particular qualities can be most vividly displayed. Law 7. Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. This law generates more anger than almost any other in the book, and that anger is the clearest evidence of how true it is. Greene's observation: use the wisdom, knowledge, and legwork of other people to further your own cause. Those who helped you along the way become invisible, and you appear the brilliant, independent actor. The historical example that Greene opens with is Thomas Edison, or more precisely, the team of engineers and scientists whose work Edison systematically took credit for. The invention of the phonograph, the incandescent light bulb, and dozens of other innovations attributed to Edison were largely the work of people whose names history has forgotten, precisely because Edison understood that the person who controls the narrative controls the legacy. Is this fair? No. Is it how power has operated across all of recorded human history? Unambiguously, yes. The deeper insight Greene is offering is not steal credit from people who help you. It is understand that in the world of power and visibility, the person who synthesizes, presents, and takes responsibility for outcomes, regardless of who produced them, is the person who accumulates power. Credit accrues to presence, not to effort. This is why the executive who manages talented teams accumulates more power than any individual member of those teams, even if those individuals are doing the actual work. It is why founders become billionaires, while early employees who built the actual product become comfortable, but not wealthy. The practical application for most people is simpler and less cynical than the historical examples suggest. Learn to present other people's good ideas as part of your thinking. Learn to synthesize inputs from many sources into outputs that bear your name. Learn to occupy the credit-receiving position in collaborative work, not by being dishonest, but by being the person who stands in front of the work when it is presented. Law 8. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. When you force the other person to act, you are the one in control. This law is about the profound power advantage of being the destination rather than the seeker. In any relationship, romantic, professional, political, the person who wants the meeting more, who travels further, who adjusts their schedule, who reaches out first, is in the weaker position, not because reaching out is weak, but because the act of reaching out signals desire, and desire is leverage. The master of this law, in Greene's telling, was Napoleon, who systematically refused to negotiate on anyone else's terms or timeline. He understood that the moment he appeared to need something, to need peace, to need an alliance, to need a meeting, he had given his counterpart power over him. In business negotiations, this is why the buyer who appears desperate always pays too much, and the seller who appears desperate always sells too cheap. The desperation is the problem, not the underlying value of what is being bought or sold. The practical technique Greene recommends is patience combined with strategic withdrawal. Rather than pursuing an outcome directly, create conditions that make others pursue you. This might mean withdrawing attention from someone who is taking you for granted. It might mean making a single offer in a negotiation and then going silent. It might mean building your reputation and presence to the point where the people you want to work with seek you out rather than the reverse. The deeper principle, the person who controls the frame of any interaction, who sets the terms, the location, the timing, the agenda, has an enormous structural advantage over the person who accepts those terms. Fighting for control of the frame is often more important than fighting over the substance of what is being discussed. Law 9. Do not commit to anyone. This law is perhaps the most counterintuitive in the entire book. We live in a culture that valorizes loyalty, commitment, and taking sides. And yet Greene argues, with considerable historical support, that the most powerful figures consistently refuse full commitment to any faction, any alliance, any cause. The logic is not cynicism. It is game theory. When you fully commit to one side, two things happen. You become predictable. And predictable people are easy to manipulate. And you close off your options. You lose the ability to pivot, to negotiate, to play different parties against each other. The person who remains uncommitted, by contrast, retains a crucial resource, the appearance of potential alignment. Every faction believes they can win them over. This makes the uncommitted person valuable to everyone, and therefore powerful in ways that the committed partisan can never be. Greene's historical exemplar here is again Talleyrand, who remained loosely affiliated with every government of his era without ever fully belonging to any. While those around him rose and fell with the fortunes of specific factions, Talleyrand remained. Not because he was without principles, but because he understood that survival and effectiveness required preserving his independence. The modern application is subtle. Full commitment to an employer, a political party, a social group, while emotionally satisfying, systematically reduces your leverage. Not because loyalty is wrong, but because unconditional loyalty removes the thing that makes you valuable. The possibility of your going elsewhere. The person who can credibly walk away from any situation always negotiates from a position of strength. The person who cannot, or who has signaled that they cannot, negotiates from a position of weakness, no matter what other advantages they hold. Law 10. Despise the free lunch. The final law we will examine today is in some ways the most immediately practical, and the one that most directly contradicts common sense. The law, what is offered for free, is dangerous. It usually involves either a trick or a hidden obligation. Pay your own way to stay free of gratitude, guilt, and deceit. Be lavish with your money and keep it circulating. Generosity is a sign and a magnet for power. The first part of this law is a warning. Nothing is free. When someone offers you something for nothing, they are not offering you something for nothing. They are creating an obligation, a psychological debt that they will collect at a time and in a manner of their choosing. This is one of the most consistently validated principles in social psychology. We are wired to reciprocate. When someone does something for us, we feel an immediate pull toward doing something for them in return. This pull is so powerful that it operates even when we are consciously aware of it, even when we are trying to resist it. The person who gives you something for free owns a piece of your future behavior. This is why cult leaders begin with gifts, why salespeople offer free meals, why politicians fund small community projects, The gift is not generosity, it is investment. An investment with expected returns. The second part of the law is equally important but less intuitive. Be generous yourself. Spend money, give gifts, fund others' work, not from weakness or insecurity, but from a position of strength. Generosity signals abundance, and abundance signals power. The person who hoards their resources signals that their resources are scarce, which signals that their power is limited. The paradox Greene identifies is this: the miser accumulates money but loses power. The person who circulates money freely, who treats it as a tool rather than an end, accumulates the social capital, the relationships, the reputation, and the goodwill that translate into far greater power than any saved sum could provide. The practical application: pay your own way, always. Avoid gifts from people who may later want something from you. And when you have resources, deploy them strategically, not to buy loyalty, which is impossible, but to signal strength and build the reputation for generosity that draws people and opportunities towards you. 10 laws. 10 uncomfortable truths about how power actually operates in the world. People who have never read the 48 Laws of Power often dismiss it as a manual for manipulation or a celebration of amorality. People who have read it carefully tend to have a very different reaction: recognition. Not because these laws describe what they want to do, but because they describe what they have watched happen around them their entire lives, without ever having the language to name it. Robert Greene was not teaching people to be cruel. He was teaching them to see clearly, to understand the game that is being played whether they acknowledge it or not, to stop being naive passengers in a world that operates by rules they were never taught. The choice of what to do with this understanding belongs to each person individually. Some use it to protect themselves from exploitation. Some use it to build legitimate, lasting influence. Some use it to navigate institutions that would otherwise crush them. What it cannot do, once you have seen it, is become invisible again. You now see the game. The only question is, what will you do with that knowledge? If this video changed how you see the world, subscribe. Because every week, VeilMind goes deeper into the psychology of power, influence, and human nature. The things they should have taught you, but chose not to. Next week, we go somewhere even more personal. We will be examining the psychological manipulation techniques that are being used on you right now. Not by obvious enemies, but by the systems and people closest to you. Techniques so subtle that most people spend their entire lives never noticing them. That video drops next week. Make sure you do not miss it.